Sorry.
Are you a Northwestern guy, Rob?
Now so
Oh, that's right. You taught that.
stick around long enough before your job's easy.
Right. What are you responsible for?
All executive program.
Yeah, you have are you full time?
Yeah, right now.
Do I have an office for you and everything?
I know a bookkeeper inside. I do it.
Do you teach
Grab
courses?
your copy.
Teach courses too? What do you teach?
Governance, marketing.
No, I
crisis
went
management, leadership.
Gives me my
well, it's
governance book.
I don't know.
Crisis management book.
There's a number of them, but you,
I wrote it with
Paul Verbennen.
Yeah.
I know a guy who can get you a copy.
I haven't got one yet, so I won't hold it.
No, I don't know. The Mississippi one is, yeah, could be.
It's probably 3 years ago. I had
Yeah.
and I had a guy
Hello, how you doing?
from the association.
Hey, Joe, I'm Vince McRae. Nice to meet you. Julie.
And I will buy the original copy.
I do corporate governance. Just about 40.
Yeah.
I know where you live.
I keep up to date enough. And for a friend, I teach one of his classes.
Yeah. Is that right?
Listen to that on the drive from Minneapolis. And
Yeah, you have to.
It's changing so quickly. One of the issues about writing this book
yes, at the U, yeah.
moving part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And senior at
I was over a year into it, and a Harvard University
submitted 6 applications.
goes through things.
Find ways to try and break it.
That's a year secret.
I was going to say, it's colors.
Yeah, because when I got to that,
You went to that junior college?
Oh.
this and very thin.
I had a friend who was working for Kenilworth, so
Yeah, I know, there were all the things that I was like, okay, so this helps me understand.
University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yes, yes.
He was not. I not only know Cam, I know his dad. His dad was the head of our firm the day I joined.
Hi. When is he born?
You met Bill?
And the church here, and his calendar, like after Christmas.
It's going to be like church.
Sorry about that church bell across the street. Start with that bell rings.
Usually on Sunday morning, we walk through that door. It's great.
You don't like to waste any time waiting for.
Well, I'm looking for parking.
Right.
But we live in the house next door.
We work together. Are you kidding? Has the church bell rung? It rang.
Yes.
Did it ring? It rang. Then let's start. That's our call to worship and our call to the 7 p.m. class as well. Thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to Julie Peterson. Raise your hand, Julie. She's a Board of Trustee member who is in charge of our adult education program and all of these public affairs events. So thank you for arranging the distinguished Tom Cole to be here. I'm going to have Tom introduce himself in a minute, so let's not start there. Let's start, Tom, with a brief abstract of what your book is. What's the thesis? And up front, let's find out where you're going.
Well, we'll start with the title, which you see up here, which is, it's interesting when you publish a book, you negotiate the title with the editor, right? This is not where we started. It's not where I started. And I got, anyway, they said it should be doing, right? Because it's an active thing. And it's all about how business leaders, and I'll talk about in a moment about why I focus on the business leaders, how they can help create a real meritocracy. But the basic thesis is this: we start with the definition of meritocracy, right? Which is a system that puts people in positions of power and authority based on merit, not money or social position or birth. It's pretty simple, right? Simple to speak the definition. It's good in theory, but historically and even currently, it's flawed in execution. And so this book is really about reforming that, addressing the flaws. How can we do that? And I also take the position in the book, which the subtitle suggests, which is that the reform really should come from the private sector, and will most effectively come from the private sector. And we can get into why I say that. Some of you can guess I'm a centrist Democrat. Anyway, the required reforms. The first one is to utilize a broad, robust definition of merit. Unfortunately, the definition of merit has evolved to talent and effort. Jefferson called it talent and virtue, and the virtue kind of dropped out. So I push very heavily on the notion of character as being an important element of merit. That is, when you're making decisions about who to hire, who to promote, particularly into positions of authority, you really need to spend a lot of time on character. And character has many subparts, including but not limited to integrity. And we'll get to that. The second reform is there needs to be still greater inclusiveness in establishing the pool of people from whom you would draw. And right now it is inadequate. It's still inadequate, even though it's improved some. I mean, it's certainly improved since the middle of the 20th century. But it's been too short, too narrow in terms of inclusion because of several things. One is what I call in the book meritocratic inheritance, which one definition is affluence begets affluence, or, and put another way, it's good to go to New Trier. The second is credentialism, which is overemphasis on particular credentials, where you went to school, where somebody went to school, that kind of thing. And then the third is, and this is probably for some the most controversial element of my list of causes, there is still there are lingering effects of systemic racism. And you really need to pause on that. And I go into in the book to make the case for why there at least was systemic racism, and certainly why there are lingering effects. I think most of the elements of systemic racism have gone by the by, but there are still lingering effects of that. So in any event, when you take those three factors, among others, and there are not many others, you still have a need for improving inclusion. So how do you improve inclusion? Well, doing meritocracy right means doing affirmative action and DEI right. And we all know what DEI is because we've seen it attacked so much. But it is possible to do that right, even after the Supreme Court decision and after the various attacks on DEI. You might not call it DEI anymore, but you've still got to deal with that, because there are real benefits to diversity in any organization. I've observed it. I've been involved with managing organizations and certainly advising those who manage organizations. So diversity is still a very positive thing to have in any organization. One of the elements of doing DEI and affirmative action right is you have to avoid a double standard. You can't simply have a lower standard for folks that you want to include. They've got to earn it. They've got to be on a level playing field with everyone else. Why is that? Well, if you have a double standard and you admit people into important positions without them meeting the other standards, you demean those who are similar, who have met the higher standard. Stephen Carter, who Bill knows, who's a professor at Yale Law School, not the right law school, but a pretty good law school. He wrote a book called Reflections of an Affirmative Action Baby. And he said, if there is a double standard, then people like him, he was African American, walk around bearing a label that says this person might not be qualified. And so you've got to not only not have a double standard, but you have to be aggressive in saying you're only applying a single standard. That's an important element. The other problem with the double standard is it puts people in a bad position, right? If they are really not qualified, they're going to be over their heads. It's going to be a source of stress for them. And there's a thing called imposter syndrome, which again I talk about a little bit in the book. And then the last part is it really weakens the organization, obviously. You want to populate an organization with the very best people. So that's that. The final required reform, I believe, is that winners in a meritocracy need to be humble and less condescending. And so humility is one of the elements of that broader definition of merit that I advocate for. And one of my favorite stories, and I'm finished in one moment, I talk about in the book. And I'm going to read it so I don't screw it up. One of the best stories about arrogance on the part of the elite involves a self-important airline passenger who, unhappy with a gate agent, thundered at her, "Do you know who I am?" The agent calmly said, "One moment, sir," picked up the paging microphone and said, "There is a man at gate B1 who apparently is suffering from amnesia. If you are missing someone from your party, please come here to assist." And I'm told that's actually a true story, but I'm not that clever.
So thanks for that concise definition of what a meritocracy is, Tom. You said something else in here. You say that a first cousin of meritocracy is the American dream, and then you define it as a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they're innately capable, and to be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. Any comment about that? What do you want to say about that?
Well, the important thing is it's a first cousin. It's not the same. Meritocracy decides who's in charge, who's in the elite. The American dream means that you can do the best you can. You're not going to be held back. I think George Carlin has the definition of American dream. His quip about the American dream is they call it a dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. But there are real benefits to revitalizing the American dream and making it more real to people. Again, Bob Dylan's comment was, if you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing to lose. And it could lead to antisocial behavior. There's a much more academic version of the Bob Dylan. But it's very important for society, for folks to think there is an American dream that can be achieved. And if you reform meritocracy, you go a long way to revitalizing the American dream.
Okay, thank you. So let's use yourself as a test case for meritocracy.
Whoops.
How has your life history led to the writing of this book and to your contemplations on meritocracy? You've known some modest success in the legal and the academic worlds.
Yeah, I got
So
to wear a funny hat.
Did you go to, you didn't go to New Trier?
No. I went to
Where did you go?
Upper Darby High, which is non-mainline Philadelphia, about half college prep, half not. I talk in the book about people who are on third base and think they hit a triple. In fact, they were born there. I wasn't born on third base, but I had a lot of advantages. First of all, my high school was a big public high school. I had 685 in my class. It was about half college prep, half not. But it was a decent high school, and I had a terrific English teacher who taught me how to write. So that was a big leg up. From there, I got into Duke, which in the 60s was not Duke as it is today. And then I got lucky and I transferred to Johns Hopkins, which is right up there with the University of Chicago as being where the place where the fun goes to die. You know? But I did well enough at Hopkins and got lucky with some mentors, and that led me to the University of Chicago Law School, which is that fun to get up there. The other thing that, even though I wasn't born on third base, I was in the 60s and 70s when I started my career, a straight white Protestant male. So I didn't have that trouble with inclusion when you get right down to it.
That was an advantage when you were coming up.
It was the lack of a disadvantage, yeah, and it was an advantage. And I learned a lot from various jobs. I mean, I did everything from selling Fuller Brush door to door to working in construction to waiting tables and at the cafe of the Baltimore Art Museum. I learned a lot about how rich people are terrible tippers. And other things I did. Oh, one other thing I did was for 2 years I worked with emotionally disturbed adolescents, which taught me how to negotiate without any leverage. Then I started my legal career in 1975 at Sidley, and my first senior partner was Cam's father. I remember him greeting us that day we started. And I, being one who not very nomadic, I spent 47 years at Sidley. 25 years in senior management, 15 years as chairman. And I still had a very heavy practice, largely public company M&A, which meant I spent a lot of time advising boards, advising CEOs. And so I got to see meritocracy at work and where some of the flaws were. Then I've also been lucky. I had some good experiences in not-for-profits for 23 years until I aged off. I was on the board of the University of Chicago. I was on the board of Northwestern Memorial Healthcare and chaired that board for quite a while and had other decent experience. And I would say that throughout that period, I had real benefits from great mentors. Two of the mentors are included in the dedication of this book, Howard Treenans and Newton Minow. The president of Hopkins at the time I was there, who I got to know, was Milton Eisenhower. And for a period of time, I worked for Ben Heinemann Sr. His son became the general counsel of General Electric after he left our firm.
So you're a pretty good example of what you're talking about when you talk about meritocracy in this book. You're from modest beginnings, yeah, but you had excellent education at three beautiful places, and then you had these mentors who taught you how to replace them one day. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, but the other thing I had was luck. A lot of right place at the right time.
A lot of luck, which means you have a lot of humility as well.
No, that's an honest statement. There's no humility to that. That's just honesty.
What are you doing here when you're wearing this sophisticated regalia?
I was asking myself that.
Are you giving the commencement address or something?
I'm giving the commencement address for the law school.
Cool.
Yeah, and I told people about luck.
Let me ask you two related questions. They're kind of companion questions. You can choose which one or both of them to answer. First of all, you wrote this because there was another book that triggered you. That's your word, triggered in quotes.
I was triggered.
And the book is called The Meritocracy Trap. So you can talk about that. And then you also are very honest in this book about how hard it was to get finished and published because of what was going on in the world outside. So talk about both of those things for us.
Okay. The first time I ever heard the word meritocracy was from a fellow associate who was leaving the firm and said he was going to miss it because he thought it was the closest thing to a perfect meritocracy he could imagine. So I quickly looked up meritocracy. I knew what perfect was. Then fast forward, and I see this book from yet another Yale law professor called The Meritocracy Trap. And it basically was saying, you know, it's terrible that people are striving for things and they're losing their authentic life and all this stuff. And I have some quotes from that book in the back. And I thought, that's terrible. But it caused me to read a lot of other books about meritocracy, which for the most part were sort of dumped on the notion, right? So I thought, you know, the opposing brief needs to be written. So I got into it, and I read all these other books, and I thought about it. And then, lately the word meritocracy shows up in the press all the time. Not in a particularly good way always, but it's there. So that's what triggered me. Now, the hard part about getting the book done was I started this 3 years ago. Okay, what happened in those intervening 3 years? Well, the Supreme Court of the United States came out with the Harvard UNC case, Students for Fair Admissions, and I was well into the draft, and then the case came out, and you can't write about meritocracy without talking about affirmative action, without talking about race. So that caused me to make a massive rewrite, and then some guy got reelected, right? And the attack on DEI from both the government and from the folks who, frankly, were bankrolling the Harvard case was dramatic. So I had to move along on that. And I am literally, first of all, when you write a book, it gets locked down probably 5 months before the publication date, so you can't make any more changes. Well, nothing stood still, right? I have a file of of things I'm going to put in the second edition, if there ever is one. Now, this is my third book, and there's not been a second edition of the first two. So, but I'm not doing this for the money, that's for sure. I am nowhere near minimum wage, right? But so that's the story.
Okay. So back to the definition of a meritocracy. You hark back to Thomas Jefferson, who endorsed a natural aristocracy. We'll define that in a minute, as opposed to an artificial aristocracy. The grounds of this are virtue and talent,
Right.
as you pointed out. He said further that natural aristocracy I consider as the most precious gift of nature for the government of society. He was advocating for a meritocratic government led by people of virtue and talent, and then I'm quoting you, sadly, with far too few exceptions, both the executive and the legislative branches of our current federal government are woefully failing to meet the standards of a meritocracy.
I have already disclosed that I'm a centrist Democrat. Exhibit A, right? No, there are, and you can lay the blame, if you accept that premise that there are people in government who you would not hire, right? Although some people would say, well, I wouldn't hire them, but I'd vote for them. And then it may be because there's a single issue that really drives the vote. There may be other reasons, right? But no, sadly, there are folks, and you have to look no further than the current cabinet room, frankly. But we shouldn't get too deeply into politics.
You want to curtail that
I
conversation?
want to separate church and state.
Okay, all right. Okay, you alluded to a robust definition of meritocracy earlier. Let's get into that a little more. It is a robust definition, and these are the components of a robust definition of meritocracy. Stop at any point when you want to comment. Talent is the first one. It's always listed first. Comment?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
Self-evident?
important. Yeah, hopefully self-evident. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Effort is the second.
Effort is important, but you need to recognize that effort is not measured solely, as a lawyer would say, by billable hours. I mean, there is an element of efficiency to that. And in the current environment, you shouldn't penalize folks for wanting to have a good work-life balance.
Okay. The third is integrity.
Integrity is big.
I want to quote Warren Buffett. You quote Warren Buffett. Describing who he wants to hire. He says, we look for intelligence, we look for initiative or energy, and we look for integrity. And if you don't have the last, the first two will kill you. Because if you're going to get someone without integrity, you want them lazy and dumb.
Yeah. Or better yet, you don't want them at all.
Right.
No, integrity is really quite critical, and it, in some ways, it's the driving element of the definition of character. Although these other aspects of character are important as well. But the problem is if you have people who don't have integrity and you put them into key positions, then you're running big risks, right? If there is a crisis or they're under stress, they're going to cut corners, right? If they don't have the integrity to say we got to do it right, we've got to protect ourselves. If they don't have integrity, how do they convey the all-important in an organization tone at the top, right? If they don't have integrity, how do they have followers? People will see through them, right? They'll know that they're out for themselves, and they will cut corners, that kind of thing. And if you have leaders in an organization who don't have integrity, you damage the reputation of the organization. It may not happen all the time, but at some point or another, it will damage the organization. And finally, if they don't have integrity and they don't have character and these other elements of character, they may be in a position of taking advantage of subordinates. Think #MeToo, right? It's easy to forget that. That hasn't come up recently. It was certainly it's certainly an ongoing issue. Can be an ongoing issue, and you'd think people would learn, but they don't always think with their brain.
Fifth is life experience. You've already alluded to that in your own personal case.
Yeah.
Fuller brushes and waiting tables and dealing with
I
challenged
hated
youth.
Fuller Brush.
You
I
hated
used to
Fuller
go and
Brush?
ring the. This was in 1968, right? Summer in 1968. There were riots all over, right? I would ring the doorbell and I would say to myself, I hope nobody's home.
How long did you do that?
About 2 weeks. I was terrible.
In your book, you quote David Novak, who is the retired CEO of Yum Brands. He grew up in trailer parks, went to the University of Missouri, the first in his family to go to college, and he worked nights at the Holiday Inn. Mm-hmm. In a Wall Street Journal interview, it was reported that he says that his own humble background has helped him see the potential in others and is an important skill for a leader. And you said pretty much the same thing as well for yourself.
Because you'd be willing to look deeply beyond the credentials, beyond the artificial aristocracy, beyond the network, and say, is this somebody who's got talent, somebody we ought to bring along, somebody who's worth mentoring, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Sixth is humility. I love the way you put it, efficiently. You just want a leader who says, I don't have all the ideas. Right?
Right. You know, the leader who says, again, I'm about to get into politics, I'm not going to do it. But you can put on a hat. Go ahead.
I'm trying to think if I want to ask. I think I'll skip that question.
Yeah, please do.
The way I will ask this. The way you phrased that,
Yeah.
I don't have all the ideas, evokes things we've heard a lot since January 25.
But the advantage of a leader who says, I don't have all the ideas, they're going to foster collaboration and collegiality, because people will be willing to say, well, then I'm not going out on a limb by coming up with my own idea, or even having an idea that is different from what the CEO says.
Right.
And so they're going to be able I come at this whole subject through an organization through the decision-making perspective, right? What's going to advance decision-making to the highest level? And having people collaborate and in a collegial sort of way, so that you have light, not heat, that kind of thing. Learn to disagree without being disagreeable, and all other cliches. That can be very important to an organization, and that's one of the reasons that should be an element of your definition of merit.
Okay. Selfless ambition.
Right.
That combination of adjective and noun implies to me that ambition in itself is not a bad thing. You need people to have ambition.
Right.
But it can't be self-centered. Is that?
Well, it can't be exclusively self-centered, right? I mean, people are ambitious, right? Or if they're going to rise in the meritocracy and join the elite and all that stuff. But if they are selflessly ambitious, then they convey the notion to others around them that they are as interested in the success of the organization and as interested in the success of their colleagues as they are their own. I actually had I did a lot of board work, advising boards, and there was the lead independent director of a board said, you know, we've got this heir apparent, and she is really very talented, and she's working like a dog, and I'm no trouble with her integrity, but she's so ambitious that she's putting people off, and she's not going to have a good follower. And I said, tell her about selfless ambition. Tell her to convey to the notion to others that she's as interested in their success as her own, that she is terribly interested in the success of the organization. So I love that phrase.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Resilience is next?
Resilience, yeah. I mean, if you, again, this gets down to a CEO without integrity or without resilience, if they get, you know, have a crisis or make a mistake, they're not going to be able to dig their way out of it very well. So, you know, you want somebody who's resilient, because we all make mistakes. I've certainly made enough of my own.
Yeah. This next one might have surprised me more than the others. Fundamental kindness, empathy, and respect for others.
Right, right. I mean, if you're going to put somebody in a position of authority and power and prestige, you want them to be thought of as a good person. And if they don't have respect for others, we get back to #MeToo, right? At a minimum.
Thanks, Tom. Convince us
Uh-oh.
that DEI and meritocracy are not mutually exclusive.
They're not. Now, you know, some of the attacks on DEI and on affirmative action say, well, it's anti-meritocratic, right? Because you're putting people in positions, and, you know, on the basis of DEI. This is why I talk about no double standard. If you are really, really assertive on no double standard, and you not only talk the talk but you walk the walk, then you can then DEI is actually pro-meritocracy, because it expands the pool of individuals who can be put into these positions of authority. Or put it another way, when I first raised the subject of the book, I had a prior editor who's since retired, which turned out to be lucky for me, because he said, write a book about meritocracy, you know, best person for the job. And my response to that was, well, we got to define best, but we also, it's more complex than that, because if you really want to have a meritocracy, you want to have the biggest possible pool of people who are eligible to be considered to be at the top. So you've got to expand the pool. And the way you expand the pool is through DEI, through affirmative action. But now, I mean, if both of those subjects, affirmative action in particular, and DEI, you can do that with, first of all, no double standard, but you can do it consistent with what the Supreme Court requires, at least of college admissions, and probably in the business arena. If you key in on socioeconomic diversity as opposed to racial diversity. I mean, I posed the thought in the book that if you have an African American child of a billionaire, and you're comparing them to somebody from a white from Appalachia, you know, I mean, the African American child of a billionaire is probably not going to bring a much different perspective to solving problems and decision making than any of us, right? Except they're richer. But yeah, so.
You quote a 2015 McKinsey study which says, new research makes it increasingly clear that companies with more diverse workforces perform better financially, which surprised me. And then you go on, you must be quoting somebody else, but it says, another observer has labeled diversity as the mother of creativity.
Right, right. Both of those get challenged, and the McKinsey study has been challenged, and Rob is laughing because he probably knows all the challenges. But I think there is still some element of truth to that. I mean, the McKinsey study basically, tries to correlate diversity and financial success of an organization, and I think there is some element. I mean, diversity plays differently in different kinds of organizations. One of the great examples that one of my colleagues raised was there was a chain of bridal salons. They sold wedding dresses, right? I went into bankruptcy, and she said, "Go figure, they didn't have a single woman on the board." I mean, that's a slightly extreme example, perhaps, and kind of a law professor example, but there you have it.
Yeah. Okay.
But diversity of perspective. I mean, I've observed it myself when we had more women on our executive committee, more women on our management committee. We had different perspectives were brought to bear on issues, and that was really important. That was important for a professional services firm. I'm sure it's important in various different kinds of businesses.
So along with DEI initiatives, you would put affirmative action in the same camp. You would say affirmative action is a contributor to meritocracy.
It can be if it's done right. Yep.
What is credentialism?
When I first started writing this book, I was telling a couple people about it, and I got a lot of free advice. One was, be careful, man. You can't write about that without talking about race, and you gotta handle that with kid gloves. Another one said, "What, you want to jump right into the culture wars?" I didn't realize I was doing that, but sure, why not? But then you're saying credentialism. So somebody said, "Oh, you ought to write that book. Make sure you cover credentialism." I said, "Absolutely." And I went home and I looked up. I looked up credentialism. Credentialism. Did I just turn? Oh, I'm still here.
You're there.
Okay. You sure?
Yeah.
Credentialism is. It's off.
Cuts in and out.
Credential. Hello. Wait a minute. Wait. I am such a technophobe. I can break anything. And I'll just speak.
Now you're on again.
Credentialism is over-crediting formal credentials and reaching conclusions about someone's worth and merit based overemphasizing that. Still can't hear.
Check your pocket and the wire where it's connected to.
Oh, that's a good idea, because it's when you move, yeah.
When I move?
Make sure it's snug.
Now? No.
Need another battery.
What's that?
We'll get another battery.
Oh. I didn't realize I was talking that much.
No, battery's good.
Maybe if I just put that in my lap.
Yeah, let's try that for now. Let's see what happens. I'll keep it on the same one for now.
How about now? No? Still not on?
Oh.
I-
There we go.
There you go.
Cool. And there's another one.
For a second, here you go.
We're going to do karaoke after a while. So it's over-crediting formal credentials. When I was doing research for the book, I thought, after I looked up what credentialism was, I did my own little survey of the CEOs of the Fortune 50, Fortune 500 and the CEOs of the S&P 50. And I was surprised that like 10%, only 10% went to what we would call the Ivy Plus colleges. So 90% went from all over the place, including, the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, went to basically the General Motors Institute, now called Kettering Institute, right? And there are other examples. And then I came across a book which went even further and looked into the backgrounds, the academic backgrounds of Rhodes Scholars and Nobel Prize winners and on and on and on. And again, it's the same thing. So, and then there's another survey done that says if you're looking for people who are entrepreneurs who are starting up companies, they're more likely to start up with a unicorn, you know, $1 billion value, if they went to the University of Cincinnati or the University of Utah, not Stanford, as you would expect, or some of those other places. So credentialism, it's important to step away from it. Now, for a law firm, stepping away from credentialism is something that law firms have done a long time ago. It's been decades since law firms would recruit only out of the top 10 law schools. And I remember one dean of a law school declared that his law school was among the 20 top 10 law schools. That was actually the dean at Northwestern who said that.
What is tear the paper ceiling?
Tear the paper ceiling is an element of the credentialism, which is, this is an organization it's a lot like what the Business Roundtable has done with its emphasis on skills-based, basically saying we need to recognize that not everybody needs to have a 4-year college degree to be successful in their particular area. Now, I agree with that, and I think that's very important, but I would also say let's not use that as an excuse not to push high potential individuals, particularly from rural America or the inner city, and say you can settle for something less. You don't really have to go to you don't really have to go get a 4-year degree. So I think it's an important element. There was actually an article in today's paper that I put in that file for the next edition I'm telling you about that says people are moving a little bit away from the skills-based notion.
Okay. A recent lawsuit filed against Northwestern Pritzker School of Law by a conservative group calling itself Faculty, Alumni, and Students Opposed to Racial Preferences. They allege that the leadership of the law school has propagated and enforced a mandate to hire as many non-white and non-male faculty candidates as possible, and intentionally and consciously discriminated against white men who are heterosexual. In support of this allegation, the plaintiff cited purported instances where less qualified minority candidates were hired over highly qualified white men. The first sentence of the complaint speaks more broadly and breathlessly. Faculty hiring at American universities is a cesspool of corruption and lawlessness.
There's another similar quote, which is, it was a headline of an op-ed piece, which is DEI in law will ruin America, right? This frankly gets back a little bit to the no double standard. If there is credibility to that point of view, or that allegation, which I'd be a little surprised at, but if there's credibility, there really shouldn't be double standards, and it's hard. I mean, if you want to have diversity without double standards, you got to make investments. You got to work at it. You can't just take the simple path of saying, look, we're just going to make the numbers. You know, we need 4 more people who are like this, or 3 more people who are like that. You got to do the work. The work can be putting together and investing in a pipeline. Pipelines are terrific. You can invest in apprenticeship programs, and when you bring someone in, you need to invest in mentoring programs. You need to invest in doing the things you need to do to help people succeed. And if people didn't go to New Trier or some fancy college, and they come into a milieu where they're surrounded by folks who did, and those folks also have networks who are looking after them, you know, you need to help them step up their game through mentoring and the like.
I'm going to ask you 2 companion questions. They're really the same question. What is meritocratic inheritance? And what is the difference between natural meritocracy and artificial meritocracy?
Right. Well, artificial meritocracy is basically aristocracy. I mean, that was Jefferson's term.
Right.
So if you populate, I mean, meritocracy was originally really about government, But if you populate organizations simply with aristocrats, you know, as Jefferson said, that's a source of mischief, right? If you have natural aristocracy, that's in a way a synonym for meritocracy. That is, you're putting people with talent and virtue in the right positions, and they deserve to be there, and they will do better for your organization. They'll do better for your government. They'll do better for all kinds of things.
Okay. What impact on meritocracy did these realities have? World War II, Pell Grants, and the GI Bill.
Right. World War II created a melting pot where people, if you read some of the articles, there are a number of books about this, but people from all kinds of backgrounds were thrown together and had to rely on each other, and it created a melting pot of individuals and helped lead to a meritocracy. And the GI Bill was thought of as a terrific advancement of meritocracy because it made it possible for people who would not otherwise be able to go to college to go to college. And the same with Pell Grants, and the Pell Grants are still very, very important. But there's a difference, and you're about to ask me about Vietnam. We rehearsed this. So what Bill's about to ask me, Vietnam reversed that in a lot of ways because children of affluence were able to basically avoid the draft, or if they were drafted, were able to get stateside kinds of things. And if you look at the statistics of who was in the field and who was on the front lines and who got injured in Vietnam, they skew heavily toward African Americans and other minorities.
This is neither here nor there, but it was very interesting, so I'm going to bring it up. You quote Mike Bloomberg, who noted that in the 2012 presidential race, 96% of all campaign contributions from Ivy League faculty and employees went to Barack Obama. Bloomberg went on to caution that a university cannot be great if its faculty is politically homogenous, and that great universities must not become predictably partisan. I thought that was very interesting. 96% is huge.
Yeah, this gets into viewpoint diversity, and I'm actually a believer in this at the University of Chicago. We have a lot of viewpoint diversity. It's probably one of the reasons the feds haven't attacked the university, maybe one of the reasons. But viewpoint diversity is important because you don't learn if all you're sitting around is talking to people who believe the same things you do. Now, interestingly enough, I raised this question about viewpoint diversity and whether boards of trustees of universities should pay attention to this. And the president of Caltech told me he thought that was getting a little too close to the board being involved in an academic decision, which was kind of interesting, right? But I do believe I got to figure out how to address his point of view. But I do think viewpoint diversity is important, and you know, it's part of the interplay and way you get to better. It's just different perspective. It's a different kind of diversity, but it can be equally important, particularly I think in terms of educating our youth, but also in terms of the credibility of institutions of higher education. I mean, there are some screamingly unsupported assertions about how all the universities have been taken over by the radical left. I think that, at least from my own perspective, that's crazy and unsupported. But if there is enough smoke there, maybe there's a bit of fire.
Okay. One of the chapters in the book is called Private Sector. And you admit there in the book, as you just have to us, that you're a centrist Democrat and generally believe that government can and should make a positive difference in our lives. But you have way greater confidence in the private sector to advance a natural meritocracy than you do in government. You want to talk to us about that?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's simply a function of the fact that the private sector employs many more people than government, even if you include public education, right? So the private sector says grace, no pun intended, says grace over more individuals than the government does. And there are very good people in government, but if you look at the folks who are in the leadership positions, at least now, but to some degree have been in the past, they're not all committed to meritocracy like the private sector can be and should be, and for its own self-interest is.
You talk about the fact that in our current political situation, it doesn't look like it's a priority of the electorate to vote for persons of integrity and character. You lament that in this book.
Yeah, one of the things I've sent this to Bill earlier, during the Clinton administration, in the middle of the Lewinsky scandal, of all organizations, the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the organization that leads Southern Baptists, adopted a resolution basically saying only people of good character should receive our votes and our support. Now, somehow, and somebody else figured out the way they rationalized this. Somehow, evangelicals were ecumenical, not evangelical. That was one of Bill's sermons.
Thank you for doing that.
There you go. It was a plug. Somehow, the evangelicals nevertheless turned out in force for Trump. And how did they justify that? Well, they justified it by going to the Bible, and they talked about King Cyrus, and they talked about David was not necessarily a good person, but he did good things. And so doing good things is more important than being a good person. I don't believe that, for all the reasons I said, that character is such an important element of merit.
In a separate piece, this will be the last thing, and we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. In a separate piece, it's not in this book, Tom, he gave us a mandate. He says we need a mass movement, complete with petitions, rallies, full-page ads, yard signs, and bumper stickers that embraces and insists upon a meritocratic government. We need to loudly and collectively pledge to support only candidates who are committed to meritocracy.
Well said. Who said that?
Chapter 10 of this book is called A To-Do List, and
Yeah.
Tom wanted to finish this session with the to-do list. Let's get to that if we can, but let's turn it over to the folk and see if they have any questions for you.
Great. Rob.
A lot of good points, obviously, as I would expect from you. Love the list. I think that's why I want for my daughter to marry that guy. So. And they pretty much did, which is good.
My 4 daughters have done that.
The DEI side, I run a corporate governance conference at Kellogg. And 230 boards represented. And I think I agree 100%. It's DEI done right. It hasn't, as many CEOs will take a look, it hasn't been done right. And you have too many examples of why people were ready to get away from it is because it was hurting their companies. And you've seen example after example of unqualified people. I have a sister-in-law who is an eye surgeon that came up from Yale, and she's on the board of the Yale Med School. And she has seen it time after time where they absolutely bent the standards. And I can assure you, I don't want an eye surgeon whose standards are bent. Same with pilots, same with too many other jobs. And it's the done right part where it gets you. I think a lot of these CEOs have also baked in diversity, hopefully done right, into their organizations. Yeah. And they call it something else, but it's the E part of it, I think, that really threw a lot of CEOs, which is the equity versus equality.
Right. I mean, people sometimes think that the E in DEI is equality. It's really just equity. Yeah. It's bringing someone in without a double standard, but recognizing that some people are going to need more support to help them achieve everything they can for themselves and for the organization. So the equity part is what creates the equality of opportunity after you've gotten over the hump of bringing them in. That's really important. The DEI done right has another element, which is not only avoiding a double standard, but I quote in the book, there's a bunch of surveys, one from the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, and the Center for Talent Innovation that said less than half of all professionals surveyed in 2019, regardless of race or ethnicity, think that their companies have effective diversity and inclusion programs. They weren't done right. And the other problem is the way you can set yourself up for criticism is to have these DEI loyalty oaths before hiring someone. You know, so the faculties that are of schools that are saying we're not going to hire you until we read your essay about what you're going to do for DEI. I mean, that really is asking for a loyalty oath, and it's just so easy to criticize that. So DEI done right has lots of elements, but the leading part is no double standard. Jeff?
So Tom, I don't know if you get into it in the book. Do you actually get into what organizations might do meritocracy right? And things that come to mind, I mean, successful sports teams, for instance, right? I mean, you know, they draw from those that don't draw from a very diverse pool of talent aren't going to be as successful as those that draw from broader pools. So that sort of comes to mind. And I don't know if there, and then the other thing is structure. So obviously, you know, at your organization, you know, that was a partnership structure.
Right.
And so how did that potentially play into the fact, you know, your ability to do meritocracy right, if you will?
Well, one thing a law firm does that is meritocracy is that they don't have lockstep compensation,
Yeah.
right? And if you want to encourage some of these attributes, the other attribute important for another merit, element of merit for a professional services organization is people who are collaborative and collegial, right? So one of the things we did, and every year, because we didn't have lockstep compensation, we would interview every partner, and then we'd sit around and we'd talk about things. And the interview was designed to get behind the numbers, you know, so that we weren't slavishly affected by billing hours and billings to clients. But the last question we always asked was, tell us the other partners who did the most to help you advance your career this year. And that, it's a great question, and it makes a point, because everybody's thinking, well, I want to be named by somebody else, right? And there was not this, you know, collaboration on that either. So, yeah. Oh, by the way, one other sports thing. I do have a digression in here about the NFL to encourage companies who say, you know, I don't want to get attacked for DEI and all this stuff. And I say, you know, look on the back of some helmets of NFL players right now. You know, fight racism. Jerry.
I think woven into a lot of what you say is this idea of a diversity of ideas. And whether it's at the university level, at the corporate level, or the political level. And I'd love to get your take, it may not be the appropriate venue, but the gerrymandering that has gone on has created such concentration and lack of diversity in ideas that we get these very concentrated far right, far left. And because we're a democracy trying to strive for the majority or plurality, what do the mainstream people who have diverse ideas, maybe left of center, right of center, they need to play to the extremes. And we become this hyper crazy dynamic. And so, you know, I guess diversity of ideas, I'd love to get your thought, but I'm going to ask you another question. I'm really going to write the book on how AI affects all of your business. I think that's your next challenge.
I can't get my microphone to work. Or I can't turn on our television set. I can't even spell AI. But going back to your point, I think one of the problems, one of the reasons I don't have a lot of confidence in government in addressing all this, too many safe seats, right? We got too many safe seats, too many people vote on the basis of a single issue, right? And there's a variety of single issues that are driving things. And there's also one of the discussions about the culture wars is that the culture wars are set up so that politicians have really no incentive to talk to the other side. And the culture wars are substantive in a lot of ways, but also seem to set forth moral positions that are difficult to move away from. It's hard to compromise. Yeah, Elizabeth.
I believe you started the discussion with focusing, with the comment that there were still sort of trace elements of racism that needed to be addressed within the business community. I was surprised that you focused on racism and not also sexism. So as a woman that's been in consulting for 4 decades, a lot has gotten better, but I still find myself banging my head on the wall when I see the lack of advancement of women. If you look at Fortune 500 companies, not many are led by women. More than in the 80s, but still not a lot. When I look at tenured professors in business schools, not a lot of tenured women that are professors. So I was wondering why you took the bent, focusing more on racism as opposed to sexism. I thought, well, maybe you're a very clever guy. Maybe you thought that for the most part we've turned the page on the sexism issues, and I'd be just curious what your perspective was on that.
Actually, I don't believe we've turned the page, and I'll confess I sort of punted on that a little bit if you get to the chapter on affirmative action and whatnot. I say everything I'm saying about race could equally apply. And I also make the point that when you're talking about the effort point, I make the observation that when a man leaves a meeting early to go coach a soccer team for his kids, they think, what a good dad. When a woman does that, bogus questions get developed about maybe she's really not dedicated. So I do think it is an ongoing problem. And frankly, if I would critique my own book, I'd say I didn't cover that enough. I think you're absolutely right.
One point that I'd like to hear your perspective a little bit further on. You talked about, what's better dealing with meritocracy, the private versus the public. And I think about the mission that you have in private, which is for-profit organizations, shareholder maximization, wealth maximization, whatever, making money. Whereas in public, you could argue the mission is to do good things for citizens or people or something like that. So given that arguably the stated mission is a little bit different, how does meritocracy somehow, why do you move to the private versus the public given the difference in the mission?
I have more confidence in the people who are leading private sectors right now than the government, but also in terms of, okay, so the goal is profit maximization, shareholders, and all that jazz, in the long run. And so if leaders of corporations in corporate America are thinking about the long term, they will address this. It may be in the short term, investing in pipeline programs and mentoring programs, could cost you a nickel a share in your earnings, but for the long run, it's going to be much better. And executives and CEOs and boards who are focused on the long-term benefits to the shareholders, will make those investments.
Kind of playing off of the comment earlier and your response made me think of something that I was taught maybe 10 years ago before DEI, we even knew what that was, or maybe it was taking shape, and that was bias training and kind of understanding what that means, how it relates to habits, which are part of, everyday life. And then one of the best comments I've heard from that is, if you're not working on your biases, then they're probably working on you. And I was wondering if, in your ideas of expanding sort of diversity or a more diverse pool, is that concept of understanding our biases, is that still an important part of that, and should that be taught? Is it still taught?
Yeah, I address that in a couple of different ways. So there's a chapter on defining merit, this part, and then it's immediately followed by determining merit. And you have to, in order to really determine merit, you have to be very self-aware. And you have to be self-aware, you have to be aware of your unconscious bias, but also cognitive bias, which is, the medical profession really knows about this because it affects things like diagnoses, but things like anchoring bias and confirmation bias, and if you, the other is the halo effect, and do you credit the merit of an individual more because they're like you, right? Which is not, it's not the same as unconscious bias, it's cognitive bias. Do you credit the merits of someone else because of your first impression of them? And then worse, do you throw in non-merit-based considerations? Like, boy, they're good looking. And honest to goodness, that comes up. Does somebody look like central casting? Name the position. Are you over-crediting? Do you overcredit charisma? Which is really, really interesting. I had a conversation, and I'm not going to tell you what company, but I was talking to a hedge fund guy, an activist hedge fund guy who was attacking one of our clients. And he said, yeah, the CEO there is exhibit A for overcrediting charisma. That's how he got the job. And he was right. But I continued to defend.
One last question. Anybody? Maybe that's a good place to end then. Thank you all for being here.
Grab a book.
Thank you, Charlie. Good job.
This is like taking a test on my own book.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a question for the University of Chicago. I also went to